everybody. It's Tommy Norman, Chief Agility Officer for Ackland Avenue. I'm here with Kelsey, who was our keynote speaker the other day. Kelsey, thank you so much for agreeing to sit down with us and have a little chat. How's it been so far with you at the conference?
Awesome. It's my first time at an Agile conference, so I'm learning what an Agile coach is and all of these different role definitions, but it's been good so far.
Absolutely. So I've heard a lot of good feedback from that keynote. So tell us a little bit about what you were talking about and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, the foundation was just what is it like to be engineering with empathy. We build products and services, and sometimes we can easily get lost in the process of it all. And so what is it like to re-engage and have a purpose, right? What do our customers want? Do we spend time with our customers? And maybe more importantly, looking for an opportunity to be customer zero. Use your own products and be part of that feedback loop.
Okay, that's fantastic. Did that extend also to like empathy inside your own teams and all that, kind of at all levels? How do you see that?
Yeah, I just told a few stories about, when we think about the products that we work on, who uses them? What happens when they're down? One of the references I made is, I was working at a payment processor, and one of the things that we used to process payments for was the food assistance, EBT cards. Mm-hmm. And so imagine one of your customers in that checkout line, and that EBT card doesn't work. Unfortunately, like under other customers, they don't have another form of payment. And so when that system is down, you're in that war room kind of taking your sweet time. Look, it's just another outage. But here it is, someone's gonna have to go put all of that food back and leave the grocery store empty-handed. And so for people that understand how important their products or services are, you tend to gain a little bit of empathy. And so when you're approaching uptime, support, being on call, adding new features, being safe with the products, that empathy tends to help give us that motivation to take those things serious.
All right, so in Agile, we like to start, especially at our company, we like to start with personas. We start with product vision, actually. Why does this product exist? And then when we start talking about target market, we talk about personas, and we really like to, tell me a story. Don't tell me admin user. Tell me the story of that person. Is that something similar that you guys use? How do you kind of get that voice of the customer?
Talk to the actual customer. I think sometimes personas can be a good stand-in, especially if it's pretty repetitive, the roles and profiles well, but things change over time. And I've seen it. A lot of companies don't update those personas, right? These things end up being like baseball cards, right? All these cards, all the personas are in their rookie year. But what happens when they change? What happens when those people evolve? And sometimes without that sometimes you literally have to watch a customer using your product or service in production and in the context of all the other things, including the stuff that you don't make.
Right.
And I think it's really hard to just absorb that by looking just once. And so I think the people that do spend time with those customers, they can actually represent that customer well. And look, you can't do it, then maybe have the customer come in and be a part of that process. So it's really about getting those feedback loops. But there's just something happens when someone has that connection, this sense of pride, that they are the ones that's going to take that personal responsibility, independent of the process. I want to know exactly who will be using this, how it makes them feel, and always know that I have that direct connection, and when possible, to establish that feedback loop.
Fantastic. So with I've been in some places where we've been able to do that, and we've been able, I worked at a company called Omnicell, and they did cabinets for drugs and things like that. And you had to go at least once a year and do the job of the people you're with. And it was kind of cool to say, oh, they'd talk about a feature. I go, I wrote that feature. And then they'd say, I don't like that feature. I was like, oh, somebody else wrote that feature. But then also seeing a thing of where, oh, I didn't know you did that. That's a new thing we can do. And you would come back and sit down with your product owner. Are there other patterns or techniques you guys can use to get as much face time with as many people as possible?
Yeah, some people will invite customers to their offsites. Your whole team is getting together, and the customer can sit up there and tell their own customer stories. Right. What was I doing before this product or service? What are we doing after? What we wish would change? But I just don't think anything beats the field trip. That part where you go there and you get to observe, and even bonus points when you get to be the user, get that job for a little while. So I think people that are in that position are very fortunate. And then for people that are maybe using, you're not a dentist, right? So how do you simulate what it's like to rely on a piece of software? And again, I just think watching people work, and if everyone can't go, even having that videotape of hey, here's what they click on the most. Here's the features that trip our users up the most. Those are the things that as an engineer, I want to know. And again, just anything that can help me have that customer empathy be close as possible.
Are there some maybe rabbit holes you go down that sound good? Like I remember I used to do heat maps, like where people's eyes go and stuff like that. Are there maybe some things that they sound great, but maybe they mislead you because the data actually gets a little away from the customer?
Yeah, we're not robots.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing people have to remember. When you over depend or over rely on the data, you tend to start chasing red herrings, you go down, or you get to the point where you just see what you want to see. And so I think it's really important to have a little bit of intuition involved. So you have to talk to a wide range of customers, not just your highest paying enterprise customers. There's a whole spectrum of there. But I think this is why it's so important to have as many people on the team also using it so they can bring a little bit of that human piece in to fill in the gaps. Here's what the data is telling us, but why?
Right.
Why does the data look this way? And if we were to do something different, would the data even change? And that can be a good telltale sign that you're down the right track.
Fantastic. So you said you've been, it's been a couple of days and you've seen a couple of things. And what are you seeing? What trends are you seeing? What topics are you seeing that you think is kind of like what's on the tip of everybody's tongue right now?
Look, I'm new to this whole like process-oriented space. Even though I've been a part of teams that have either adopted something like Agile or kind of rolled their own thing, I'm noticing people are very aware of the term. So many Agile coaches, people are either practicing something like SAFe. I just learned about that today. But it feels like a lot of people are starting to say from experience, you got to tweak it. You got to bring these things in and pick and choose the components that you like the most out of these methodologies and find something that works well for your team. So I spend a lot of time talking to people about how do you choose which components work well, what things work well at one company may not work well at another. And so I've seen a lot of remixing where people are saying we're doing stuff from all three of the big popular methodologies and that's working well for us. And there are some people that are challenging some of the rigidness of it all, right? What happens when you start to kill innovation? When people are just like, look, I don't want to think anymore. Just tell me exactly what to do. We'll spin the wheel and I'll tell you how many story points you want to hear. And so I see a lot of people saying, hey, that isn't what Agile is, and we have a little bit of personal responsibility to make it work well for our teams and just use it as a starting point.
Right. It does seem, it's a good thing that Agile's been now, it's kind of become the thing. There's not a lot of people saying, we're still doing waterfall. But then there's levels of Agile, and there's also people who just kind of rename it and they're still doing their old things and they adopt a set of practices. All right, we're having stand-ups and we have story points, we have to do this, and now magic will happen. And it's the codification of practices and dogma that I see, and there's so many new coaches that have come in there that are still at the rule stage. That I think that's that voice that all of us react to is like, okay, I don't care if you answer the 3 questions at the stand-up. I don't care if it goes longer than 15 minutes, as long as it's still meeting the principles. Why should I care? Because again, it's about people, and almost. If there's I can't remember who did it, but they took the whole Agile manifesto and they made everything say blah, 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 except for peoples and interactions. That's it. People and interactions. Do things that do that better, and everything else kind of fits itself. It's a gross simplification, but it is trying to stress the people part of any process is in the people.
Yeah, the big takeaway I got is this is a communication tool. At the end of the day, software development has become so complex. It's not really about just producing working software anymore. This software usually has global customers, there's global laws and regulations, there's different languages you have to translate this stuff to. And I think it's gotten so complex that the definition of a software developer may now have a law degree, may be in the finance department. All these people contribute into the final product. And imagine trying to get them all on the same page and then have some bit of predictability in when things will happen and when they can come in and do their part. So when I stand back, whether you're using sticky notes on a whiteboard or a Kanban board, I think it's just a way of communicating to a wide range of people so they can get on the same page. That's been my biggest takeaway of being here for the last couple of days.
Well, I like that idea of, so one of the principles is business people and engineers working together all the time. And you're kind of almost take a step further. Is why, what if the business person was somewhat of an engineer? Could you do that? And bringing the subject matter expert further down into the team. I love that idea as well.
Yeah, I think they're all developers. I mean, if you think about more mature industries, like when you're building a house, the thing when people walk into that room, they may notice how it's decorated. They may not think about the studs that are behind the drywall. Is the person that did the interior decoration not as big of a part of the process as the person who put the tiles on the roof? And so I think we just got to expand our definition. These are inputs into building correct software as intended. Until we start to kind of give these different disciplines equal weight, I think you just end up in the right place where the communication we choose ends up working well for everyone because we kind of see them at the same level of input to make the software.
Sure. So what are we going to be talking in a couple of years from now? What do you think the next wave of things are going to be? Where does it evolve?
I think that's the thing I would like people to be talking about in a couple of years now. Like, I think a lot of people forget that Agile is here because someone thought that the previous thing needed to evolve. And I think when people are really earlier in their career or they don't get to switch around a bunch, I talked about this in the keynote, some people have 20 years of 1 year experience. And so they may think no thinking is required at all. Just follow the rules prescriptive and then there will be no evolution. You're just having people kind of banging their head on the wall trying to make this work for every scenario. And I would be interested into what that evolution, I think any evolution I've ever seen, I'm more on the engineering side, on the technology side, and typically it's easy to predict the future when you're working on it. And in those scenarios, what are the parts of this process, whatever methodology you've chosen that don't work well, and anything you use to improve it will evolve this whole practice, and maybe it evolves enough that you give it a new name.
Sure. And I love that. So you talked about Agile being a lot about communication and people, and I like to, when people say, well, we can't do Scrum or we can't do Kanban, I'm like, take that word out there and put continuous improvement, because these not only these communications, but they're continuous improvement mechanisms as well. And if you say we can't do continuous improvement, that sounds pretty silly. So, boiling it down to it's people, and it's and it's a communication tool to make sure you're right. 99% of all practices are talk to the right person at the right time. And then it's about continuous improvement. What you did yesterday is not necessarily going to work the next day. And like you said, if you get 1 year of experience 20 times, that's not evolution. So maybe that's the next step is letting a lot of the dogma and pomp and ceremony fall away and boil it down to those simple things.
Well, also I think the thing I didn't hear talked about a lot here is what happens when the platform underneath gets more efficient or easier to be building predictable things. If you think about, I guess, the auto industry where some of these ideas are pulled from, when you go from hand-making cars to robots in the factory, things may get a lot more predictable. You may be able to try new experiments because the factory floor can be retooled to actually produce those prototypes. And I think that's probably going to be the other part of the equation. We have these low-code and no-code software development environments where, once you get that idea in place, 90% of the application is generated in a predictable and secure manner. What happens to this process? Does it get faster? Right? When you get air travel, you get the vacation industry. If I can get somewhere in a couple of hours, I can stay a couple of weeks. But if it takes me a couple of weeks there, I'm not going to sit there for a couple of hours because I got to get back. So I think that will play a big part of it. How is the Agile process changed when the underlying platform is actually more efficient than it was before?
Well, we've actually, some older people, we have seen that already. I remember, I didn't do punch cards, but I was around people who did punch cards and big mainframes that there was no way to be Agile on that platform. And then, you get to the 80s and 90s where everybody had a computer, and then it was easy. It was, I didn't have to do punch cards, and you had Visual Basic and things like that. So that was the low code of that time. And so that would be that next evolution of, we would have ever thought of being able to do some of those things on those computers from the 60s and 70s. So what is a computer going to look like when it has a program that you can just talk to it and it goes, I built 80% of what you just needed. And you have to do that. Now, that scares all the developers out there because they've been told for years something's going to make it to where we don't have to code. There's always going to be some element of that because the system always needs that personal touch in there.
Well, there's also experiences. I think these days it's less about bringing data in and running a very simple algorithm over the data. I think most of the work most developers do these days are experience related. How does it feel? What's the UI? And I think those are the components where, as long as there's competition, I think there's always going to be someone looking for that competitive edge to do something in a slightly different way to get you to a point where you want to attract those users.
Awesome. So what's next for you? Is there anything you're going to next time or anything you want to shout out for people to take a look at?
I'm so busy, I can't even name a single thing, but I spend most of my time on Twitter.
Okay.
And on Twitter, I've been loving things like Twitter Spaces where you can have impromptu conversations like this. And so if you want to follow me and see what I'm up to next, Twitter, at Kelsey Hightower on Twitter. Right. DMs are wide open, and I love to have conversations like this.
Perfect. Well, thank you again so much for seeing us, and thanks everybody for tuning in.